We're talking about the Buffalo Bills salary cap situation today with special guest Greg Tompsett from Cover One on today's episode of Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino from the Draft Network, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Happy Tuesday to you, and thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day. Now, listen, I know I told you yesterday that today would be herd mentality on the podcast, but just like Josh Allen at the line of scrimmage, sometimes you read the defense and you have to call an audible, and that's what we're doing today because I had a unique opportunity to chat with Greg Tompsett, who you can see on your screen if you're watching on YouTube. And he just is very savvy on the salary cap and contracts and those types of things. And it just was a great opportunity to fit in a conversation regarding the Bills' salary cap situation entering the offseason. And so we are pivoting today to this conversation. Tomorrow will be herd mentality. And Greg, thanks for being here, man. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I was excited to be able to jump on and get everybody ready for the offseason here. A lot of numbers being thrown around all over Bills Mafia. So excited to talk about it and add a little more fuel to the fire.
So, of course, I had the opportunity to watch the Cover One salary cap spectacular on the Cover One YouTube channel. And I sent you a text message as soon as I saw it posted. I damn near wanted to kill you. 2.5 hours. And I'm like, okay, I really want to watch this, but I don't know when I'm going to have, a free 2.5 hours. Greg, I have a personal law that I don't even watch movies that are more than 90 minutes. Okay. I mean, I know I can sit there on a Saturday and watch college football from noon until, 2 a.m. And I'm a walking contradiction right now, but I usually can't consume anything else that's more than 90 minutes. But I pushed play on that thing and I couldn't stop. 2.5 hours later, I wanted more. And so I'm excited to have a bite-sized version of a lot of those great talking points that you and the guys over at Cover One were able to put together.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite shows every year, and it is a lot, and it does we get a little nerdy sometimes, but for the most part, it's really good dialogue, it's really good discussion, and it's we joke we play the roles on that show of Brandon Beane and Terrence Gray and Lake Dawson and Brian Gaine and what those discussions are like, and I think people underestimate that really is what some of those discussions are like they are really kicking around those, well, we could do this, well, this would be the alternative, are we sure we want to do that, and talking about all those different options. I think that players probably get talked about in those settings, much more plainly and transparently than what you assume. So we had fun with it. I'm glad you checked it out. And for anybody else, feel free to break it up into bite-sized chunks. You can binge it in half-hour segments.
You can push pause.
We'll do our best to condense it today.
Yeah, I loved it, and I'm anxious to kind of get into a lot of that stuff here today on the podcast. So, Greg, we're talking Buffalo Bills salary cap. What is the Buffalo Bills salary cap situation as of right now?
So the starting point is we're actually negative. We're below. We literally have negative cap space. So that's it. It's over. The franchise folds. No, it's in the situation where, because of things they did and some things that I'll propose here, not likely to be earned incentives. People always get kind of goofed up between a likely to be earned incentive and not likely to be earned incentive. I'll give you a real quick example. This year, last year, Cole Beasley had 1 touchdown. So if next year they put an incentive of, hey, you get $1 million if you score 2 touchdowns, that won't count on the 2022 salary cap because it's not likely to be earned because it's more than what he did in the previous year. The easiest one teams do that with are games played. Somebody has injured the year before, you do a games played incentive, and all of a sudden it's not likely to be earned. Well, if those guys earn that, those get calculated at the end of the season. They get kicked down to the next year's cap. So we actually just went down in cap space, depending on what resource you use, anywhere between 2.5 to 4 million. Luckily, like every team in the NFL, we have many different contracts we can play with to restructure, to move around, to release players, to get pay cuts. We'll go through a lot of those different examples. It'll be very easy to get not only under the cap, create space to re-sign players, and create space to add new players. But technically right now, we are in the red.
Yep. So that means that cap space has to be created. Things have to happen here for the Bills to not only get under the salary cap, but have money to sign players and sign the draft class and do all the basic functions that a football team does. So, Greg, I know you've scoured this roster and you're familiar with all of these deals. What are those contracts that are sending off signals for you that appear almost obvious that the Bills need to do something with them to create some more cap space?
So there's 3 different groups here. I have a total of 7 players. There's only 2 direct cuts, in my opinion. And that hasn't actually been a tool Brandon Beane uses super often, that he just straight up releases players early on. We've seen a few of them.
Can I stop you there?
Yeah.
Because that is definitely a thing. Like, we've seen Brandon Beane has cut some players, right? John Brown, LaShawn McCoy, but he's also honored a lot of contracts, whether that's Trent Murphy or Vernon Butler. You know, there is something to be said for Brandon Beane not taking advantage of a lot of these opportunities that have existed in the past.
Yeah, and we'll get to another tool in his tool belt he uses, but just straight up releasing is not the most common.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's going to come down to 3 things: value for the team currently, value in the marketplace, and then simply the finances of how much money are we talking about. There's only 2 players, in my opinion, that are so plain and simple that the return is so easy they have to do it. It's AJ Klein and Mat Hawk. AJ Klein, you're at $5.1 million. If you release him, it's only $400,000 in dead cap space. Mat Hawk is actually not super pretty, but his agent is a better agent than Mat Hawk is a punter. Mat Hawk's agent negotiated a $1 million guarantee in his salary on March 18th. So if Mat Hawk is still on the team as of March 18th, his entire salary is guaranteed. It wouldn't matter who you drafted. It wouldn't matter what other guy you signed. I'll wager a healthy amount that Mat Hawk is released prior to March 17th after the Brandon Beane's comments.
Can his agent hold though? I think that's what we have to establish.
It's a competition. It's a competition
for sure.
Those are the 2 straight up cuts that I think that I predict will happen. There's 2 more that I think the finances of their contract are greater than their value to the team, but they're offensive linemen. And we know in the NFL, offensive line has value in the marketplace, especially when you just had front office members and an offensive line coach leave to another conference to go another place. So I think both John Feliciano and Cody Ford probably have more value amongst NFL leadership than amongst Bills Mafia fan base value. John Feliciano, if traded or cut, would create $3.4 million. Cody Ford would create $1.5 million. I'll also add, neither of them have any of those cutoffs or escalators, and you need 15 linemen in training camp. So whether you cut them March 14th or September 6th, they still have the exact same amount of cap space. So neither of those are so much money that we have to do it ahead of time. Those are guys that likely would go through camp, and then you try to trade them before cut down day if you can't do it early. If you can trade them now before the draft, that's even better because you get a draft pick now instead of a 2023 pick. But those are 2 guys that I would be very surprised. And all 7 of these guys, I guess I would put under the category, I don't think they're on the roster under their current salary cap number, and those 2 would be there.
Let me stop you there, Greg, because you mentioned offensive linemen, and the Bills are in a unique spot at offensive line because mostly everything is intact. You have a restricted free agent in Ryan Bates. You have Ike Bacher, who's an unrestricted free agent. Literally everyone else is under contract for 2022 right now. Now, obviously, there's a lot of opportunity within those deals that the Bills will need to look at, but I think one thing to be mindful of as we consider the contracts on the offensive line is that Aaron Kromer is coming to town. This is a new offensive line coach, and I think you can assume that he's going to want to bring in some guys that he's worked with, right? That maybe some of those expiring contracts with the Rams, like a Joseph Noteboom or an Austin Corbett or a Brian Allen. I'm
or
not
even Austin Black.
All of those. So as you consider the opportunities to get out of deals to create cap space, but also introduce guys that are familiar with the offensive line coach that he's quite frankly going to want to have in the building, I think we can read between the lines there and predict reasonably for there to be some movement here with the offensive line.
Absolutely. I do think, again, I don't think John Feliciano or Cody Ford will be here under their current salary cap number. And I'll add to that, my next group are guys I expect to stay, but under a pay cut. And I'll lead off with Darrell Williams. We've shown it in the past. This is not just something he does with people remember Vernon Butler, people remember Patrick DeMarco, people remember players like that. But, Mario Addison gave back money. Mitch Morse gave back money. I have a feeling they offered the same kind of deal to both Vernon Butler and Quentin Jefferson, and we just lost the coin flip on that one. That I certainly wish Jefferson had said yes sooner, because he got less money from the Raiders to play a heck of a lot better than Vernon Butler. We'll let that one pass. But I have a feeling that's where we go with Darrell Williams, that they're able, and how these happen are, hey, you still have value to this team. We're not sure it's as much as what you'd get on the open market. How about if we find a number in between? So we don't know that you're a $9.8 million player, but we think you're a $7.5 million player. We're okay paying that for a guard. Why don't you give us a little bit back? We'll put it in some not likely to be earned incentives. And if you make a Pro Bowl or whatever, offensive line isn't the easiest one to do for NLTBs. But we'll set it up that, hey, you can get a little bit of that back, but we need a little something for you to stay here. I think he's one of the most common ones. That could be $2 to $3 million, depending on how they structure it. I think Tyler Medikevich is another one where I think the team values him. Yeah. I think they like him. I'm not sure it's at that number, but I don't think he's a straight up cut. I think they find a way to extend a year, kick some money around, a little bit of a pay cut. And then the obvious one that gets talked about the most is Cole Beasley. I think, again, Cole Beasley has more value to the team, to Josh Allen, and in their mind of what they view him, especially versus zone coverage. I'm not sure it's at the number that he's at, and I think that would be an easy one to say, hey, and especially with his performance, and I'm not joking about the touchdown one. When you only have one touchdown, that's a super easy one to kick down the road to say, hey, get in the end zone a little bit more, some incentives based on how far we go in the playoffs. Here, because we got knocked out a round early. So now all of a sudden, if you put anybody's contract on make the AFC Championship game, that's now a not likely to be earned incentive. You can kick that down the road another year and we don't pay for that. All of a sudden, you can create a structure where Cole Beasley can tell himself a story. Hey, I get to the end zone a couple more times. We go further in the playoffs. I get most of my money back. And everybody's happy then, because nobody's mad about paying that out if you have that year.
Right.
So those are my 7 in that category of, I think, 2 straight up cuts in AJ Klein and Mat Hawk. I think 2 more that won't be here under their number in Feliciano and Ford. I would predict a training camp trade or a deadline cut for Cody Ford if he just gets beat out. And then 3 pay cuts in Cole Beasley, Darrell Williams, and Medikevich. Altogether, those, I think you could put together, honestly, almost $20 million if you do it right out of that group of 7 players.
So that would put the Bills at $20 million in available cap space, or 17 if you factor in that they're already in the hole.
Yeah, that would, let's say AJ Klein, Mat Hawk more than gets them out of the hole. That gets them into the positive. So those are the 2 immediate ones that are already on the good now. And then you take the other ones, if they did all of those, I think you could get them back up to say 15, 16, 17, that range.
Did you mean to say AJ Hawk like that?
Oh, that's funny. AJ Klein being released there. I feel bad. I like AJ Hawk.
No, but that's really cool. AJ Klein and Mat Hawk together gives you AJ Hawk, the former Packers linebacker. Yeah,
and jumps on. He's on the Pat
McAfee show.
Pat McAfee show. I like him on there.
Football might be over for this season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props, to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the #1 spot for all of your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season, and it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC, and they've even got those Vegas casino games. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action, because BetOnline is where the game starts. All right, Greg. So we've obviously learned a lot from you already here on the podcast, and we got a lot more to dig into. But before we go further, I do want to give you the opportunity to talk about where people can keep up with you and your content this offseason. You know, you're not just going to NBA All-Star games all the time now. There's football content coming out of that Twitter account at Greg Tompsett.
Yeah, I actually did have an awesome time this weekend. I live here in Cleveland. A lot of people assume I live in Buffalo. Like, I'm sure you get similar questions, not realizing where you live.
Right.
But did have the opportunity to go to the NBA All-Star game this weekend. Was an awesome time. But you can find us over at cover1.net. We have all of our things on now on our YouTube channel as well, joining you into the world of YouTube.
I'm joining
So
you in the in the world of YouTube, man. I don't know what I'm doing here, but we're learning.
It's fun. You'll figure it out. So we're over there. You can find it. We have a lineup for everybody all week long. We have a live show for you each night, usually around 9:00 Eastern time, all week long, and be able to carry you through the off season. Lots of draft content going on right now. Lots of free agent prep. A lot of really good film breakdowns with the potential free agent targets. So I definitely recommend last week's. Film room was running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, and there was really good stuff in there about some of the potential guys you could go after in free agency. So come on over, check us out at Cover One on Twitter and the Cover One YouTube channel, producing all you guys need.
Yeah, the Ed Oliver video that was dropped on Monday was something you don't want to miss. All right, Greg, let's keep rolling here on this salary cap situation. We've talked about cut candidates. What about extension candidates, guys that the Bills can look to in order to create more cap space by extending their contract?
So there's always an interesting, kind of vibe here on, when you have the benefit of a contract where you're getting value and you're probably getting them for less than what the market would play. That's great. You kind of want to take advantage of that as long as you can. But the Bills are also a really smart organization, and that when you're asking so much of players and when they've had such a good run of getting slightly below market value deals, Deion Dawkins, Trey White, Matt Milano, all below probably what they could have leveraged for. Some of that you got to be proactive. You got to give that money a little bit earlier. You got to give them more money up front, and you could be smart about it where you give them a good sized check, but do it in a manner where it helps the short-term cap space. So obviously the biggest one is Stephon Diggs. He's due for that payday. You see the money that is already out there for some of the guys, Michael Thomas and DeAndre Hopkins. I can't wait to see what Devontae Adams gets. He deserves that payday. I kind of feel like he's going to be in that same mold of Trey White, where he still deserves top of the market-ish money, but isn't necessarily going to twist the knife to get every possible penny. I think that he and his agent deserve to get that shine for the day or two where they send out the tweets and talk about this huge number. And honestly, I think you can do the math where you can make it look like 3 years and $75 million tacked onto his deal, which looks awesome and is a ton there. And yeah, he may not see every single dollar of that, but you can give him like a $35 million signing bonus to do that. And it stretches out some money, and you can set it up where he's definitely with the team 3, probably 4 years out of that 5 years. And I think that when you're talking about, he seems like a guy that will age well into the age 30, 31, even 32 year. I don't think there's a huge risk doing something like that. He's the hardest one because you're giving a sizable raise. Other people that you're extending in the same price range, it's pretty easy to create space. You can still create $3 or $4 million in cap space by extending him, even more if you really play with the numbers a lot, but a realistic one compared to previous years. I can create another $4 million pretty easy by giving him a sizable raise and letting him and his agent wave that flag around for a couple of days, which usually creates goodwill.
Which I think is an important thing for Brandon Beane to do this offseason, because I want to beat Stephon Diggs to the punch. I don't want any reports coming out that Stephon Diggs is holding out or he's looking for a new deal. Get all the way ahead of that. You obviously want this player to be around. He was a captain for your team last year. The production's been unbelievable. In fact, there's never been better production in the history of the NFL with a player coming onto a new team at the wide receiver position. It's never been better. Pay this man. He's obviously tight with Josh Allen. He's a leader. I mean, you heard the way that he talked about the Chiefs game and how, look, I didn't care what I needed to do there was draw coverage away from me so that Gabe Davis could go make plays. I mean, come on. This is the dream wide receiver one for this offense. Don't play around with this at all. get that extension done, and, oh, by the way, create a few $1 million in cap for you this year.
I expect to hear that deal. I really do. I expect to, in May, that ballpark, get past the draft. I expect to hear that deal happening this right after the draft season. There's a couple more that are in not quite as urgent of a situation, but Jordan Poyer and Mitch Morse are both coming up on the ends of their contracts. Both players that are at a point, either because of play style, because of Jordan Poyer, or the concussion history, where you're probably not talking about 3 and 4 year extensions. You're probably talking about 1 or 2 years for Poyer or Morse. They're probably both honestly in the same ballpark money wise, around that $10 million a year season. I wouldn't be shocked if they need to give Poyer a little bit of a notch because of that All-Pro acknowledgement this year. I thought that was pretty cool. So I think 2 years, 20 million, maybe Poyer's 2 years, 22 or 24 million. Both of those you could create $2 or $3 million in salary cap space by extending them. And the big one, where the most opportunity for cap space, is also the hardest decision, and it's Tremaine Edmonds. And it's just, I don't know where Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott and Leslie Frazier and the entire leadership group, where they are on that spectrum. You spend as much time as I do with Bills fans and know how polarizing he can be.
Mm-hmm.
He has many staunch defenders. He probably has more people detracting from his value. At Cover One, we've kind of weirdly become seen as Tremaine Edmonds stands and defenders, because we take the stance of, hey, he's actually pretty good. Like, he's okay. He's an above average starter. And that I think people had this bar when he got drafted, that it was either Luke Kuechly, Brian Urlacher, or bust. And that, hey, he's not an elite Hall of Famer, so he's trash. We need to move on. And that brings us to the hard part. I am a Tremaine Edmonds supporter. I do think he is an above average starter in the NFL. It's now getting to the hard part of, okay, what is that worth? I don't see any scenario where he signs for less than $14 million a year. I think that a 4-year, $56 million deal is possible. I won't be shocked if he wants to try another season and see if he can increase that, because his potential would be higher. But that would be kind of the best case scenario I could see. I don't think that we're going to get the Matt Milano deal from him, just because of his athletic upside and his potential and how long he could still play from this point on. If we did that, I could create another $6 or $8 million in cap space, because it's really easy when you're extending it around the same numbers. And right now, all 12 million and change of his deal is guaranteed. I just don't know where Brandon Beane and the team are. And even as someone, and the rest of the folks who Cover One, we often kind of get lumped in that group of Edmonds defenders because we simply think he's pretty good. I don't know if I want to pay $14 million for pretty good. I'm even torn myself. So I don't know that I expect that deal, but I think it's possible that we could see that deal this summer.
You just brought up some big stuff there in Edmonds. And honestly, the follow-up that I have for you, maybe I'll have something for you on Edmonds in a minute, but I want to ask you about those safeties, Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde, and something that's really fascinating to me as I've listened to you talk about them a few different times. The thing that I can't get out of my head, and I'm sorry that I didn't prep you for this, so hopefully you have a good answer.
I'll pretend either way. It's fine.
Well, you listen, you do what you need to do, but I want to bring up the name Harrison Smith, safety for the Minnesota Vikings, because this situation here kind of blew my mind, Greg. Going into his age 31, going into his age 32 season, the Minnesota Vikings gave him a 4-year, $64 million contract. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think he's a better player than Micah Hyde or Jordan Poyer, especially at this point in their careers. So as we continue to see Poyer and Hyde get paid around 10, 11 million per season, we just had a safety enter their year 32 season with a 4-year, $64 million deal. I know I'm just kind of putting it out there, but how do you reconcile all that, Greg?
It is difficult. And I'll say we have scenarios in the past where a number gets put out there and it can calibrate the market, but not necessarily set it. We saw what happened in the years after CJ Mosley's deal with the Jets. We've seen it in the years since Mahomes' deal, rightfully people not surpassing his number. We even saw it with some of the way that DeAndre Hopkins' number was in some of the deals that came after that, and with Jalen Ramsey. When you get these not only resetting the market, but jumping by multiple $1 million per year in a market, either at an age or at a situation, I would say that DeAndre Hopkins, CJ Mosley are closer to that scenario of what you referenced with Harrison Smith, that sometimes teams are in a spot where they have to go back to the agent and say, yep, God bless him. If you got that number, okay. But that, hey, we just can't do 16 million. That's just not where we're at. And that's why I said, maybe it ends up, hey, maybe it's 2 years, 25 million. Maybe it's 12.5 million a year. And it's more than the 10 million. Because, hey, you're right. You made an all-pro team. You deserve the acknowledgement. We don't want to just lump that in. But that it does make it challenging. And that as the salary cap starts to increase again, you'll see some of these crazy numbers. The same thing we saw the Trent Brown number that happened. Well, that didn't get topped last year when it came out for other players that were probably as good or even better than Trent Brown. So there are some pieces like that where sometimes when players take a big jump like that at an age or at a position where it's not stereotypical, it doesn't necessarily just reset what the market is now for those positions. But I guarantee his agent thinks it does. And I guarantee it gets brought up. And, rightfully, that they're great players, that we have been getting a discount on both of them. And it would be rightful of them to push for more. I don't necessarily, Hyde's under contract for 2 more years. Poyer is under contract for this year, and though both of them will keep getting 1 year pushes, in my idea, 1 to 2 year, and keep going that way until we see any drop off in their play. But yeah, I'm sure Poyer's agent is asking for 2 years, 32 million.
I thought they had their best year together, and that's a high bar to clear. These guys have been great since 2017. Like what evidence is there that these guys are not playing at a high level? And when I couple that with the fact that the Minnesota Vikings, like I said, entering year 32 season, gave Harrison Smith 4 years, $64 million, which keeps him on the team through his age 36 season. It's just the safety market just has me baffled, because you saw some of these young players, Budda Baker, Justin Simmons, they got the, big time contracts. They're young guys. You saw that coming. And now you have, Jesse Bates, who's going to get a ton of money from the Bengals. And then the Honey Badger situation, who's going to pay him and what? And then there's, oh, by the way, the best safety tandem in the NFL, all pro Poe, and, should have been Pro Bowler.
Actually, was only 1 vote away from also all pro with
you know what I'm saying? It's like, I maybe Brandon Beane's just really, really good at his job, because I pinch myself at some of these valuations he's able to pull off.
Yeah, it's a very real situation, and that some of them are guys get to points in their career where the change has a value involved as well, moving, relocating, getting into somewhere else. But it's not crazy that those, there will be situations where that comes up. The Bills are collecting too much talent. There are going to be people probably in this next category we talked about where the number just may be to a point where, hey, God bless you, go get that money.
Are there any other extension candidates that we need to get to?
There are a handful of other guys who I think can come up, but not from a salary cap perspective. Okay. I won't be shocked if Dawson Knox has a discussion.
Let's go.
I won't be shocked if Devin Singletary has a little bit of a discussion.
Great.
I think
Devin Singletary,
because I think it would be cheap. Because I think you could then pair him with a rookie, and it won't be expensive.
Okay. All right, I can get on board with that.
But I think Dawson Knox is one that's smart to get ahead of before we see a couple more of these contracts get out there. But not anyone that you're doing for, and those would be, you'd have to get really creative for Knox not to have it cost you money this year. But you could restructure it where you could give them some guarantees and a solid signing bonus and kick the rest down the road and be able to do it that way.
All right, so the Bills do have some expired contracts, and you've been very good at predicting contracts for expired contracts on the Bills. And so I wanted to send a few your way in terms of what you're expecting these guys to sign for, whether it's with the Bills or another team. And so we can kind of work through this. I'll give you the first name, and it's Harrison Phillips.
Yeah, he's one where I think, Harrison Phillips is the process incarnate. Like, he's coming back from injury, back-to-back
Right.
Walter Payton Man of the Year, super active in the community and with the organization and everything that he does. Um, he's also Stanford educated, and he's a smart man. He knows there are not a lot of defense tackles on this roster right now, and that the team needs him. So I started the year, before I really got my head around that fact, probably a little lower on him than I think it's going to end up. I've seen a couple numbers floating out there that I do think would get difficult. I think that we're around 4 years, 22 million, $5.5–6 million a year. If it gets up to 8.5, I think it gets really tough. I've seen that number a couple places, and I know the other names in that range, and I like Harrison Phillips a lot, but I think he is a half notch below some of those names I've seen through. And honestly, if the Bills are going to spend 8.5 million on a one tech, there's some other names I'd like them to consider to be able to bring in. So, but if we can keep it at 5.5 million, 4 years, 22 million, he's the kind of guy that he had the worst case scenario. He had a blown out knee and came back better than what he was before. So you have a pretty good sense that you're not going to waste this money. And that obviously, although he does have impressive range sideline to sideline, his speed is not necessarily his value. So you could do a $10 million signing bonus, and that first year cap number, you could do it like $3.5 million and keep it very reasonable. And he's the only player I'm going 4 years under or anything and even close to that long. I think he's the kind of guy they want to have here, and there's very little reason not to use those numbers to play around with it and keep him here for a long time. He's the kind of player you want around that locker room.
How about Levi Wallace, who, I mean, we read the Tim Graham piece, which was obviously agent driven. Levi Wallace has been on bargain deals since he's gotten to the NFL. He's been a productive starter on one of the best pass defenses in the NFL. I got a feeling he's going to want a few bucks.
Yeah, so this is one of the ones that's hardest from the human standpoint, because you are talking about, very seriously, Levi Wallace's best chance at generational wealth in his entire life.
Mm-hmm.
He's made a lot of money for normal people, in our day-to-day lives. He has not made like, hey, I can retire for the rest of my life money. He has not. Like, that's just not the case. Right now, he can make probably the biggest contract he's ever going to get in his life. I have trouble gauging where this is. I've seen huge ranges on this, and we know all the resources where you see it. PFF's actually started producing more contract projections, Spot Track, Over the Cap, all the different resources that are out there that produce their analysis. To me, he's a $5 or $6 million guy. I don't see the $8, $9, $10 million numbers that I see. And if a team's going to give him $10 million a year, God bless him. The man was a walk-on at Alabama and a UDFA that carved out a career. If somebody offers you 3 years and $30 million, sprint to it. It's like Shaq Lawson. I liked Shaq Lawson when he was leaving, but when I saw the number, well, God bless you. Go get that money. Like, I can't be mad that somebody's going to pay you that much. So if it's 2 years and $12 million, come on home. We'll keep you here. We'll keep rolling it back. If somebody gives you 3 years and $30 million, go get that money. Yeah.
I see eye to eye with you there. How about another corner, Saran Neal? I mean, this is the Bills' best special teams player. Tyler Medikevich is there too, but Saran Neal's right there in the conversation.
Correct. And we're now getting to that point. Taiwan Jones is now 35, 30, getting to that age where it's not going to be that point. I actually think we give him Taiwan Neal's money, or Taiwan Jones money. It's, Taiwan Jones wasn't a minimum player. He was like a $1.75 million guy. And I think that's the range, in my opinion, where the elite special teams guy should be. Enough of an acknowledgement that you're not a minimum player, but we're also not going to spend a ton of money. I think Medikevich has been a little higher than I would prefer. So I have Saran Neal 3 years, $5 million, around $1.75 million a year. Hey, and we want to keep you here. There's no downside here. That's a skill set that we think is going to translate fine. We'll give you, probably even guarantee 2 of those years and give you $3 million of it guaranteed. And that you're going to be here and safe and comfortable, but not crazy money. We'll keep it rolling.
Maybe we can lump these two together because they're similar. You have Ryan Bates, who's a restricted free agent, and then Ike Bacher, who's a regular free agent, but was in a similar situation as Ryan Bates the year before. So how would you talk about those two interior offensive linemen?
Yeah, they've obviously shown their preference. I think it's a slam dunk that you RFA tender Ryan Bates. I don't think you get crazy. I've had a lot of people ask, hey, should I do a second round tender? What if the Giants signed him and they gave us their second round pick? And I joke, I said, if Joe Shane signs Ryan Bates to a contract that's high enough that Brandon Beane won't match it and then gives Brandon Beane his second round pick, he should be fired the next day. There's no like, don't get me wrong, that sounds awesome. So another guy asked me with a first round pick, and I like, that sounds awesome. Like, but that's just not how this is going to work. And honestly, both Ryan Bates is incented for them to want to do the RFA tender and not a proactive extension, because I've had a lot of people ask about that, because a 5-game stretch is good, and I'm excited about the 5 games, and I think he's easily the leader in the clubhouse for that starting left guard spot coming into camp. But I'd like to see 17 of those games. And then if he does, he's probably talking $6 or $8 million a year, because that's what a good starting guard is. So he's incented to want to just sign that, come right back, show him what's there, and then he'll get offensive linemen get paid in this league. He'll get his money. And Ike Bacher, I honestly think if not for that Achilles, might have had a market out there. We're probably going to be fortunate that we're going to be able to get him back on just a minimum deal, because we're going to be able to say, hey, keep rehabbing, use our facilities. We'll put you on probably PUP to start the year. And then if you're ready to come back, we know we have good experience depth for the second half of the season, but we'll just keep rolling you back. And I will say, I know we just saw Cam Akers come back in the same season from an Achilles injury.
That's crazy.
But Achilles still scared the crap out of me. So I'm going to assume we don't have him back urgently. And unfortunately for him, that probably means a veteran minimum deal.
And Ike Bacher's the name that I feel would be very attractive for the New York Giants, right? So if Bobby Johnson loves him and Joe Shane likes him and Brian Dable likes him, I mean, they could go a little higher than the Bills would offer and say, hey, you want to come be our starting left guard? You know the system, you know the coach.
They're multiple years.
Yeah, and they're going to need 3 new starters on that offensive line, Greg. I mean, why wouldn't you want Ike Bacher as a value player that has experience with your coaching staff?
Yeah, definitely a threat.
Isaiah McKenzie.
So
go ahead, because go ahead. Just go ahead.
It's my hardest one.
Because what has he actually done? Like, what is his resume in the NFL? I know that we all love the idea of Isaiah McKenzie, but what is his career high in receiving yards for a season? Like 280. He's been in the league since like 2017. Like,
super sneaky, going to be 28,
right?
27-year-old guy who everyone likes, everyone loves him. He's a fun dude. If anybody didn't see him on the hot stuff,
so good,
but it's hysterical. He's a fun dude. Like, I get why everyone likes him. Micah Hyde wasn't returning punts for no reason. Like, I struggle to find what that number is. Now, if you tell me you could bottle that one game where Bill Belichick was so stubborn that he kept letting Miles Bryant just get roasted on national television and make that into a thing for me, I get it. But I promise you guys, like, he did a great job. He took advantage of the situation that was there. That was so much more Bill Belichick refusing to believe that they could keep doing it than it was anything necessarily that translated to other situations. We just don't see man coverage that much. He has not shown the ability to translate that to finding the leverage in the soft spots and zone coverage. And I just don't know how much money fun gadget jet sweep guy is when they can't be a returner and they can't be a consistent every down slot receiver. So I guess I won't be shocked if somebody gives him $2 or $3 million, but we also saw this past year, he was on the open market for 5 days and then came back for just over the minimum. And I don't doubt that he had other similar offers and chose the Bills. But if anybody else was offering any guaranteed money or any multiple year deals, he did not come back giving that up. He didn't give up more money.
Right.
So will I be shocked if will I be shocked if Brian Dable and Joe Shane throw him $3 million and we don't match it? But if he's back here for 2 years and $4 million, I won't throw a fit. I don't know what we do with him now that we've decided that, well, he's not an every down slot receiver and he's not our punt and kick returner.
Right. It's not like he's going to play other teams. He's not going to cover kicks and punts or block on punt and kick.
Yeah.
So he's a zero-phase special teams player that is a limited slot receiver?
Just, hey, if you're playing a man-heavy team.
Yeah, I don't get it.
So I do think it's likely that we see him leave.
Yeah. All right, let's do the last couple here. Jerry Hughes and Mario Addison, and let me kind of lump this in with a question. What's your temperature on this Bills defensive end situation with Greg Rousseau, Boogie Basham, AJ Epinesa? Those are your three guys under contract for next season. You have F.A. Obata in addition to Hughes and Addison that are gone. So interested in two things here from you. Your contract projections for Hughes and Addison and maybe even Obata, but also what you think the Bills need to do here with this defensive end group, because, I mean, I don't know that I'm comfortable saying that those are the top three ends on this team going into 2022.
So I'll start with the part that's going to scare or disappoint people. The Buffalo Bills are planning on Gregory Rousseau, Carlos Basham, and AJ Epinesa being the core of their defensive end unit this year. Whether you like it or not, that is going to be the case. There will be a fourth and maybe a fifth guy in that mix. We've shown, depending on where it goes, their interest and willingness to rotate a fifth guy into that mix. We'll see if that's the case. That hasn't been consistently the case, but we'll see if that's the case. What they do with that fourth guy depends on the market, and I'll end with a fun one here at the end. But I do think most likely it's the Jerry Hugheses of the world, and whether that's literally Jerry Hughes,
right,
or it's Melvin Ingram, or it's Justin Houston, or it's whoever, you got a guy that we don't realize right now is going to be available and gets cut because he's out there. I do think that rotational pass rush guy is the most likely of those four. Honestly, I don't think the buzz that was coming out about Shaq Lawson earlier was, matter of fact, I can tell you with 100% certainty, it was not false. Like, the interest level and the interest from Shaq Lawson to want to come back was very real. I don't think that's dead. I think that's a possibility, and he would make sense as a fourth defensive end to bring back in, and probably what he should have been the whole time, which is a rotational defensive end. If they come back, I really think Addison's close to the end here, but he's also a guy I could see waiting and signing on in training camp after an injury from some team,
right,
wherever. Obata also, I think, is there. I think it's like a 4-3-2, like Jerry Hughes is 4 or 5 million. Addison might get 3 million from somebody. Obata might get 2 million from somebody. I wouldn't mind seeing a new name in that mix brought in, but I won't be shocked. Jerry Hughes has been here long enough where I respect it. Yeah. It's not exactly the same as Kyle Williams, and where I said I'll just give him 1-year deals until he says no. But I'd be fine if Jerry Hughes was back. And I got to tell you guys, there is another fan base that if they sign Jerry Hughes, they will be excited to add Jerry Hughes because he's better than most of us realize he is.
Well, I mean, if you can get Jerry Hughes back for $4 to $5 million and he's asked to play 15 to 20 snaps a game as a designated pass rusher, I'm in.
Yeah.
I mean, especially for what this guy's meant to the organization, the longest tenured member of the team. He signed multiple contracts. He's been through multiple coaching staffs. I mean, I feel some type of way about seeing him play for a different team. So I'd love to have him back.
And I'll say, I need Carlos Basham to be the reason they don't need F.A. Obata back. And I need AJ Epinesa to be the reason they don't need Mario Addison back. And we're only going to find that out if we give them the snaps to do it.
From your lips to God's ear, Greg. I have two super important questions that I want to ask you. But first, this episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questions like, is your Odyssey an LX or an EX? And wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry. You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and right in your pocket. You can save time and money when using Rock Auto. Why would you choose to spend 30%, 50%, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or a car dealership? Rock Auto has everything you can need. They have brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. So go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck, make sure you write Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box so they know that we sent you? They have amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need over at rockauto.com. So, Greg, tell us what's going on with Star Lotulelei's contract situation. In fact, I think a big reason why this podcast is happening right now is because I was asked a question about Star's contract, and I'm like, listen, I'm not super comfortable talking about this. Do you know Greg? And he's like, of course I know Greg. And so he reached out to you, and the next thing you know, we're having this conversation today. And so for the world,
shout out to Kyle M.
Thank you, Kyle. For the world, talk about this Star contract situation.
Okay, so obviously, I am a staunch Brandon Beane defender and champion. Unfortunately, he doesn't bat 1,000, and the Star Lotulelei contract is likely his worst contract that he's ever done. Made worse by the COVID opt-out option that the NFL created, where he got to kick back a year. So all of this was supposed to happen last year, where they would have had this discussion, and this year we would have painlessly moved on from him, and it would have been no issues. Unfortunately, that got kicked down the road a year, and we're now in a situation where, whether it's by the team's choice or I know several people have heard rumblings that he may be ready to move on, and what we're hearing is that I don't know that he's looking to come back to play again and maybe very seriously contemplating retirement. It creates complications. So one of the challenges is the word retire doesn't exist in the CBA. It's not a thing. This happened, if everybody remembers, that weird stop-start press conference with Eric Wood. I got to tell you guys, that's because they had to tell his agent and the NFLPA had to tell him, listen, you cannot come out and announce your retirement. You can't. You have to force them to release you. You can't give up that leverage. That's not how this works. They're going to be in the same situation. So just straight up contract normal circumstance, Star Lotulelei has $2.5 million guaranteed in his salary for this year out of a $6.15 million salary. 2.5 of it is guaranteed. If we just release him, you could do a post June 1st designation where we could save a little bit of money. No matter what, we're going to eat $7.7 million in dead cap. There is no way around it. There's nothing we can do. There are no options to change that other than we can take all of it this year or kick a little bit of it to next year. You can't restructure bonuses that you've already paid out. That money is due. You have to eat it. That's going to happen. What we have an option on is Star, if he knows he wants to retire, he doesn't want to do mandatory mini camp and he doesn't want to do training camp, but he's under contract, and the Bills could hold him to that and say, listen, you're under contract, and based on the new rules that are very painful for holdouts, he would get fined more than $2.5 million. So they have a little bit of a leverage foothold to go back and say, listen, help us out here. Let's restructure this so the $2.5 million isn't guaranteed. Maybe that's $1 million. We give you a little bit of it. You give us back 1.5. Everybody walks away happy. We process this as a post June 1st designation. We kick a little bit of it to next year. If they were to restructure that, they could actually get back $5.5 million, $5.6 million, which now all of a sudden, if anybody noticed, that's almost the exact number I projected for Harrison Phillips for his contract, and even less so in the first year. So that's really, unfortunately, the only part in limbo is that $2.5 million guaranteed. We have to eat the $7.7 million no matter what. But if he really wants to retire, it's there's a piece of me that says if we don't do it as a post June 1st designation, we only create $1.5 million in releasing Star Lotulelei. We eat 7.7. I'd almost rather he just stayed and was the backup defensive tackle.
Right.
So those are my choices. If it's me, is work with him to restructure it because he wants to retire, or hold his feet to the fire and say, listen, we're paying you anyways. Come be our backup one tech.
Greg, can you think of a compelling reason why when a player retires, it doesn't just magically make the contract disappear? Like, what's the reason for this? I struggle to find a logical answer to that.
So part of it is in the NFLPA negotiating with the NFL is that you would get some weird pressured situations like Eric Wood, where he has a future, with the team, where he's
I
going to
see.
get paid by the team. And all of a sudden they go to him and be like, hey, if you could just say that you're going to get retired, we'll give you some of that back here and be a really well-paid One Bills Live host for the thing. It really opens up a weird window where you could manipulate it. And what they want to do is hold the owners accountable that, hey, if
I get
you
it.
sign these signing bonuses and kick that can down the road, you got to pay it. And that's, I do the credit card analogy all the time with the salary. It's not a myth. It's like a credit card. You can kick it down the road quite a while. You can refinance, you can kick it to another card and pay it all, transfer, balances, all the things you want to do. You still got to pay the money.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm with you. That makes a lot of sense. And I don't think anything should change because yes, there needs to be integrity from the team side of things and not forcing players into retirement. That's not great. So Greg, the last question that I have for you is probably the most important thing I'm going to ask you. I mean, we've went through all of this information. We've talked about the salary cap. We've talked about where the Bills are, what needs to happen. So with all of this in mind, I mean, what is your message to Bills Mafia entering this offseason? Because, I mean, we're early in it, but there's a lot of big ideas. I mean, I get a lot of DMs and emails about players that fans want the Bills to go after and sign and trade for and all this stuff, a lot of urgency, right? I mean, the Bills are a really good football team. To me, they're the best team in the NFL this year, Greg. I thought they should have won the Super Bowl. And it wasn't because they didn't have good enough players. Okay. They goofed on 13 seconds. If they don't, they win the Super Bowl. I'm fully convinced of that. So with all of that in mind, Greg, I mean, what's your message? What is your message about how fans should be wired entering this offseason to have a realistic expectation?
Your comments are the reason that it's okay to run it back. Like, I think so many people have this idea in mind that, well, we just failed. And when you fail, if you don't change something, you're just going to fail again. That's not the case. The Cincinnati Bengals and the Los Angeles Rams are not the best two teams in football. It's just we play in a one and done tournament style. And I will reinforce that with some of the smartest football people that I know of in, Warren Sharp and Ben Solak and in Seth Walden and even guys like Bill Simmons and people like that. All of them readily listed the Bills as the best team in football and that it was a shame that the best team in football didn't play in the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl. That means running it back, we're still really good. And that's a good thing. So one, I would encourage patience. I would encourage setting your expectations that this team looks very similar to last year's team. And that not only is that not disappointing, that's an exciting thing that 25 other teams in the league would readily trade with in an instant. That the fans of 25 other teams would love to swap in that, and even 3 or 4 more that are lying to themselves that they wouldn't. The one piece that I did not mention throughout this whole show and that I didn't do is there's one more little tool in Brandon Beane's back pocket. And, on our show, we like to call them coupons. There are the restructures that can be done that we haven't done a ton of. We did a few here this past year with guys that there's no risk that we're all of a sudden going to need to cut them. So kicking the can down the road doesn't really cost us anything. And that's with Trey White, Deion Dawkins, and Matt Milano. The 3 of them, if you wanted to, you could restructure their base salary and create over $18 million in additional cap space. The reason we call those coupons is that they're only going to be done if a situation presents itself that you simply can't turn down. And that all of a sudden, okay, we need to go make this work. In, the older version would be you're out on a boat somewhere and another GM calls you and says, hey, do you want LaShawn McCoy? You figure out a way to make that work. We have a relationship and a previous trade with the Minnesota Vikings. And there's a new GM there with a player who's looking for a new deal. And all of a sudden we find out that, the asking price for Danielle Hunter is less than what we expected. And that all of a sudden, that's more tenable than what we thought. He would be a lovely 4th defensive end to add into this rotation. And all of a sudden now you need to go find a way to make it happen. And this is when fans get mad when the Rams find a way to make it happen, and the Saints find a way to make it happen, and all these other teams. If I pulled every single lever and I flipped every single switch, I could create over $65 million in cap space for the Buffalo Bills. Now, they won't do that, but those are there. And the three that would be there is if some situation presents itself where, oh my gosh, why in the world are the Saints going to eat this cap space and move on Cam Jordan? Why? It makes no sense. Why would the Bears want to get out of Khalil Mack's deal? That's a horrible dead cap situation. Why are you doing that? But okay, if you want to eat that dead cap space, we will be part of this transaction. You then flip those switches, you restructure those deals, you carve out that chunk. I don't think that's going to happen, but the one area that I could see them leveraging their future for is a game-changing pass rusher becomes available. Those are the three names I could think of. And then all of a sudden, Danielle Hunter, Khalil Mack, or Cam Jordan are more readily available because their teams are dumb and are going to eat a terrible dead cap hit. Or Danielle Hunter just isn't going to get the money he wants in Minnesota, and we decide his acquisition price is reasonable. That's when you would flip that last switch. So something fun for the fans at the end here. I don't expect those things to happen, but that is why they set up the contracts that way. They can leverage those restructures if they need.
So, Greg, I said the last question that I was going to ask you was the most important question. This is really the most important question. 17 coming back and playing quarterback?
He is.
Okay.
Every single year.
Sounds
so our Super Bowl window is as long as he's under contract and showing up in the building. So that's how long the window is.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good with that. Greg Tompsett, ladies and gentlemen, talking salary cap and contracts like nobody else can. That's why he comes and offers his expertise in this area usually a couple times a year. We like to talk about regular football stuff too with Greg, but you've got this niche carved out for yourself by being a salary cap guru, and we're very thankful for what you offer this fan base. So appreciate you coming on, Greg, and make sure everyone follows you on Twitter at Greg Tompsett, as you can see on the screen, and keeps up with all the fine work over at Cover One. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. Tomorrow will be Herd Mentality, and I have an entire show already prepared for that, so we have a lot of great questions. Feel free to keep sending them in because we do Herd Mentality every week, and so we may not get to it tomorrow, but we will in the future, so feel free to send anything that you might have. As always, I do kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.